Hi everyone, I'm Congresswoman Grace Meng from Queens, New York. Thank you all for joining us here today. We're here because many of you have written in really concerned about the situation that's going on on the border, and we wanted to bring some experts that have been on the ground and been doing some amazing work, and just to share about some of the great work that they're doing. As you know, a few weeks ago, I myself went to the border. I went to the processing centers, a CBP center in McAllen, Texas, where we were able to see, but not talk to, a lot of these kids who were kept in cages, hundreds of kids separated by gender, literally in cages, covered with the tinfoil blankets that many of you have seen. We saw kids from as young as 2 or 3 years old without parents. We saw some infants who had one of their parents with them, and then we traveled about 2 hours away to the ICE center in Port Isabel and spoke to and heard the really desperate pleas of a lot of the moms. We spoke to about 35 moms who told us about what they were going through. Most of them had not spoken to their kids at all. Most of them had not did not even know where their kids were, and those conversations and those images will, I think, haunt me for the rest of my life. And as a mom, it's just really heartbreaking. And I'm so thankful to so many of our constituents and people across the country who have called in or written in and who have expressed their concern. We've even had letters from kids. We had a Boy Scout, Errol from Kew Gardens, who wrote, "We need to change this policy desperately. This is abuse." We had Jackie from Kew Gardens who wrote to us, "Immigration is a multifaceted and complicated issue, but this is simply unjust and inhumane." And so we have so many examples of people really reaching out. And I'm just so proud of my constituents, and really wanted to thank you for being here. We're really excited and honored to be joined by 2 experts here today. We have Madhu Grawal from the ACLU, and we have Christy Turner from KIND, and would love for each of them to introduce a little bit about themselves, their organization, what work they're doing, and we'd love to have some time for some Q&A from our Facebook audience. So thanks. Madhu, do you want to start?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Madhu Grawal. I'm the ACLU's Federal Immigration Policy Counsel. And so in that position, I work closely with our litigators and our advocacy team and our campaigns team to advocate with members of Congress about what we're working on in the immigration space. And so right now, of course, family separation is one of our top issues. Many of you know about the ACLU's litigation, Miss L versus ICE, which right now there is a court order for the government to reunify all of the children that it has separated. They have actually blown past their deadline to separate the children under the age of to reunite children under the age of 5 who are separated from their parents. HHS has put out press releases saying they have now reunited under the age of 5 children who are eligible for reunification. Now, of course, we as the ACLU want to look more at what their eligibility criteria is, because they're claiming there were 103 children under the age of 5 who were separated from their parents, and of that, about half of those children have actually been reunited, and those are the children that the government is claiming are eligible for reunification. So as I said, we have been in court throughout the week and last week, and actually have a hearing before the court tomorrow to look more closely at those numbers and to understand what those numbers mean. We are, of course, thrilled for the reunifications that have happened, but remain deeply concerned about the thousands of children who are over the age of 5 who have yet to be reunited with their parents. And of course, the fact that the government even separated these families in the first place is horrific. It came out of the government's zero tolerance policy for prosecutions at the border. There's a decades-old statute known as illegal entry or reentry, for which immigrants are prosecuted when they cross the border, often seeking asylum. The ACLU has long opposed those prosecutions, saying that these are essentially immigration violations and they are best handled by immigration courts and not the criminal justice system. But of course, that statute and the zero tolerance policy implemented by Attorney General Sessions is the reason we're here today. That has led to the surge in prosecution, both the surge in prosecutions at the border and the reasons why children were snatched out of their parents' arms when they came to the border in the first place. And one thing that we talk a lot about is this administration's cruel and horrific anti-immigrant policies across the board. And when we talk about family separations, it's not just happening at the border, right? It's happening with massive raids throughout the country that are leading to families being separated and parents being thrown into ICE detention. And children, including U.S. citizens, who are afraid to go to school the next day as a result of these raids. We're seeing ICE pick up parents outside of USCIS where they're going for interviews as part of the legalization process, for example. All of this is part of this administration's broader plan to deport, to really detain and deport people as quickly as possible. They have dismantled parts of our asylum process and continue to do so through leaked regulations that we're seeing in the press. And we have our eyes on every piece of what the administration is doing, not just family separations, but as our litigators love to say, we'll see you in court. But we will also see this administration in the streets and in the halls of Congress, where we'll continue to protest and advocate against this administration's horrible anti-immigrant and racist policies.
Thank you so much. Christy Turner from KIND.
Hi, I'm Christy Turner from KIND. I'm the Deputy Director of Legal Services. KIND, or Kids in Need of Defense, is a national organization. We actually have 10 offices in different locations throughout the U.S., including an office in New York. And traditionally, we work with only unaccompanied children who have entered the immigration process alone. But we kind of, when this crisis arose a few weeks ago, we pivoted really quickly to also respond to this crisis. And we did that initially by sending a team of attorneys down to the border to the Port Isabel facility where you were visiting as well. And we've now continued to send a team of attorneys every week, and we will be sending a few people every week going forward. I was able to go there myself 3 weeks ago, or 2 weeks ago, I think, and I met with a number of parents as well at Port Isabel who had been separated from children, many whom didn't have any idea where their children were at that point. Although during the course of the week that I was there, a lot of parents were, getting in touch with their children, probably, partly due to the lawsuit. There was some progress on that, and right now we're still working to find out if the parents that we've met with, which is over 100 parents at Port Isabel, if they are being reunified with their children, particularly the under 5 children. And in addition, in our New York office, we're also working with a number of children who are at the shelter facility in New York. We've received over 100 referrals for children who were separated from their parents. And we plan to, work to support those children. We're screening them as we speak today. We're doing intakes with those kids, and we'll be continuing to do that over the next several days. And we will do everything we can to assist those children as they get released from the facility, and many of them will go on to relocate to other parts of the country where they have family members, but because KIND has a national presence, we're going to be able to stick with those kids during the course of their immigration proceedings.
Great. Thanks so much. Madhu, can you talk a little bit about what the administration's response has been to the litigation?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I think for us, we have obviously been really frustrated with this administration throughout the litigation, and even prior to this issue really becoming an issue of national importance. Our litigation was brought a couple months before the country really started to understand what was happening with family separations. And, throughout the last few months, we've continued to see the administration really dodge questioning from members of Congress at oversight hearings or appropriations hearings about its family separation policy. And so we are really grateful to Judge Sabra for the nationwide injunction that has really forced the administration under a court order to reunify children. We know that President Trump signed this EO due to massive public pressure and pressure from members of Congress. But the reality was we weren't sure what that EO was actually going to accomplish, right? And so it's really great to have this court order. And for the court, really, the court is now in this position where it's really micromanaging the government and having us and the government appear for repeated status hearings about the status of these reunifications. And when you think about the under 5 category, the children under 5 who are supposed to have been reunited this week, it has been so difficult. It has been a nationwide effort. We've been working with organizations like KIND and immigration lawyers because these parents, some of them have been transferred to ICE detention facilities, multiple times, 2, 3, 4, 5 times even. And they're really hard to locate. People don't realize that communication isn't facilitated by this government. And so parents actually have to pay exorbitant fees to even try to communicate with their children who are in ORR shelters. Many of the parents can't even afford it. And so you have parents who may not have actually spoken to their child since they've had their children ripped from their arms. So the whole thing is just horrifying. And the government's response to this has just been so chaotic because there have been 3 agencies involved, right? You have DOJ, which is responsible for the prosecutions. You have DHS, where the CBP officers are actually making the initial separations. And then you have HHS and the ORR facilities. And so communication among these agencies, from what we have seen, has not really been coordinated. And it's been like really pulling teeth trying to get answers out of them, right? And we really have appreciated members like you who have gone down to the border to see what's happening there with your own eyes, to actually speak with parents at Port Isabel, to hear what they've been through, because I think, a lot of times the public doesn't hear those stories, and really uplifting their stories and the tragedy that they've been through is so critical for the public to understand the depths to which this administration has gone to deter asylum seekers from coming to this country.
Yeah, well, what we found, what was so emotionally hard about going down to the border was that I think many of us had hoped that what we had read or seen in the media was exaggerated and, oh, it's not as bad as it really is. And then when we went down there, this is what was the approved trip, right? What the government and the administration is allowing us to see. And we realized that it's exactly the situation that we all feared that it would be. And you talk about the executive order, and that's what we had gone down right after the order was signed. And heard from the CBP agents who are doing their job that although the president signed this executive order, but there didn't seem to be guidance and details on how they follow it. And so we couldn't tell, how what the process was for kids and parents to be reunited. We were told that everyone got an alien number or an A number, but we weren't sure what happens when they're transferred to HHS. And so can any of you talk a little bit about the process? Why is it so difficult and taking so long for these families to be reunited?
Well, I mean, you touched on this, that, it involves 3 different government agencies, and coordinating the parent and the child at least involves 2 very separate government agencies. And I mean, my understanding is that the government just did not come up with a system before they started separating parents. They didn't have a process in mind that they would be able to use later to reconnect each parent up with each child. So everyone was assigned an A number, but the A number assigned to the parent is different assigned to the A number of the child. And there's no connector between those 2 A numbers. They probably could have done some kind of system where those A numbers were paired together, but my understanding is that didn't really occur. So it's been very difficult as us for attorneys to try to figure out even what a child's A number is. We don't have that information. So when we're meeting with a parent, we know their A number, or on the other end, when we're meeting with a child, we know their A number, but we don't have the ability to connect them. So some advocates have been, getting creative and just trying, the next digit or the previous digit on the A number, because there's a 1-800 number that you can call to get information about a person's name, at least in any upcoming court hearing that they may have. It doesn't tell you their location, but at least tells you their name. So we've been trying different A numbers with the next digit up. That doesn't always work because I think the parents and the kids were not always processed by the same ICE agent. So again, I can't really explain why it's so difficult. I mean, it just involves a lot of coordination. I think there are also like privacy concerns on each end when you're working with children. It's hard to get access to information.
I mean, one thing we've said, right, is that this administration thrives on chaos. We saw it in the early days with the Muslim ban. We saw it with the rescission of DACA. They love to just create chaos and then hope the public will forget about it later. And it is my hope that the public doesn't forget this in November. And it doesn't forget it when Congress is passing its funding bill, right? Because this administration was able to carry out these family separations with the record levels of funding that it received from Congress. And so we have to make sure, and I know that you've been on top of this and many of your colleagues have, to make sure that DHS is not receiving these record levels of funding, that we need to look at why it's received so much funding in the past couple of years to get to this unprecedented level of ICE detention beds where they're able to hold all of these separated parents and to be able to carry out these enforcement activities. And so for us, one of the things we're looking at is just looking forward and looking ahead. In addition to making sure that these children are reunified, like how can we make sure this doesn't happen again? Because we know that this administration is always looking for ways to just dismantle existing systems and protections that we have for asylum seekers, for immigrants, for TPS holders, and really looking for ways to break apart immigrant families and make immigrants live in fear. And we want to fight back and look forward to working with our coalition partners and members of Congress on fighting back.
You both know, and we know, and again, I want to thank our constituents because so many people have written in on asking how to help and about their concern. What are some ways that people have been most effective or impactful in terms of just being average members of the public? What have they done in the past?
I mean, I think we've seen people really mobilize around these issues in ways that I don't really remember seeing, compared to some other issues. The issue of children being in immigration proceedings is not a new issue, but I think it's really come into the public conscience through this issue. A lot of people have been talking about the video of the 1-year-old who was in immigration court recently that was in the media. And that I just want to kind of point out that actually is not new. That's been going on for a long time. And I actually ran the numbers in our database yesterday, and we have like 48 kids that we're working with that are under the age of 5. And all of those kids are in immigration removal proceedings, which basically are deportation proceedings. But I think, the public support has been great. It's been great to see people, just in their networks on Facebook. There are, so many networks that have popped up. I've been working with a group of really amazing women who are located around Port Isabel in Texas who have been just collecting supplies. They've been keeping watch outside of the facility, looking for vans, dropping people off at the Greyhound bus station because one of the issues that we're seeing the last few days is that even though ICE is reunifying some families, they're doing so in a very chaotic fashion, and they are simply leaving those families at like a Greyhound bus stop with no money and no resources. We're working with a woman actually who we met at Port Isabel who was separated from children, including a 6-month-old baby, probably the saddest case that we've come across. And through a lot of advocacy, she was reunified with her children, but they dropped her off at a Greyhound bus station literally like in the afternoon with nothing and no money to buy a ticket. So it's really appalling, the way that the reunifications are happening as well. But just to kind of go back to your question about how people are stepping up, you know, a lot of people are providing supplies, putting together backpacks of supplies that families might need. A lot of people are stepping in and providing help with transportation costs, because once kids and parents are released, they need a plane ticket to go wherever their family members are, what their ultimate destination is. And it's just been great to see people, you know, really advocating in, you know, online or in their own communities around this issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think I completely agree with that. It has been incredible to see the level of support from people nationwide. And as a mother myself, you know, being able to take my whole family to the rally in DC on the 30th, and I've actually taken my toddler to a hearing where we walked out while Secretary Nielsen was speaking, just in protest of the family separation policies. And so, and you know, I'm not the only mother who has pulled her child in to protest these horrific family separation policies by this administration. And so to see the nation really come together and say this is not who we want to be as a country has been really incredible. But also to shine a spotlight, as you said, on policies that are not necessarily new, on CBP and ICE agents' abuses that have really been, you know, this is part and parcel of what the agencies do sometimes as they carry out their enforcement work. CBP abuses are not necessarily new. We've actually had numerous reports on CBP and ICE, both detention facilities and abuse by agents. And so to see people who generally haven't been that engaged on immigration to start to understand what is happening with our immigration enforcement in this country, the fact that our border communities are heavily militarized and what that means, and just to kind of start to understand and become more active by calling Congress, taking to the streets, and really trying to wrap their heads around these issues has been really great.
Great. Well, thank you both. We have about 10 minutes left, and we wanted to save some time so our audience can ask some questions and answers. And we do have some questions already, so thank you for people writing in. We have... So one question is, I would like to know what I, as a regular citizen, can do to help beyond calling my government representatives. Could we open our home to an immigrant family seeking asylum? How can we offer real assistance? And I'll couple that to save time with another question. I would also like to know about the children that have been sent to New York. Maybe what's the scope of your work in New York? How are you working to reunite those children since they have been sent to our home state? And what have people been doing as a community to help with that process?
Sure. I mean, I can answer that piece regarding the kids in New York. At KIND, we have now received about 100 referrals for children that are located in one of the large facilities in New York, actually New York City. And we've been partnering with Catholic Charities there to help them out to screen this large number of children that they've received. So we're in the process of doing that right now. As I said, we're screening about 60 kids this week, I think. And for every kid that we see, we're collecting information about their parents. We're then collaborating with some other partners to put that information into some national databases that have been created. A couple of different organizations are trying to pull together information about kids and information about parents into one central database. So when we see a kid or we see a parent on the other end, we then enter that information into the database, and sometimes we get a match back saying, you know, we believe this parent is at Port Isabel or whatever. And then we start to facilitate communication between whoever might be on the ground working with the parent, wherever the parent is detained. But again, that's a difficult process because we don't have great access to the ICE detention facilities. So in order to communicate with the parent about the child, we then have to be there in person and put the parent's name on a list, request to see the parent that day. Yeah, so we're going to be sticking with those kids that we're working with in New York. We do imagine that many of them are going to be released. Some of them have been released already. We had a couple that traveled to Houston. We had one or two that traveled to Maryland. So then our KIND offices in those locations in Baltimore and in Houston are receiving those referrals, and will be providing intake screenings for those kids, and then planning to represent them in immigration court, because this is beginning the whole process for them too. So they're placed into deportation proceedings, the kids and the parents. They each have their own case, and our number one priority is to assign them with an attorney, which could be one of our in-house attorneys, or it could be one of our pro bono attorneys. We work with a lot of pro bono attorneys. We have a very large network of pro bono attorneys at KIND. So many of these cases will eventually be matched with a pro bono attorney, and that could be a way that people can help as well. We always have a need for volunteer attorneys to take cases pro bono.
Another question that came in. Hi, Grace. I think you should ask on specifics on how people are being reunited and what our policy is going to be on asylum seekers in general. And if we deny asylum seekers, what ramifications would that have according to international asylum treaties? Or maybe just in general, what traditionally the asylum process has been in this country.
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, I'll just say that the asylum process is getting more and more challenging. And just yesterday, we got the news that some new policies have come out from the USCIS Asylum Office that I think are going to make our cases much more difficult. And we're constantly struggling to, asylum law is difficult anyway, and under this administration, it's becoming more and more difficult. Unfortunately, the way that our asylum laws work, even if someone is fleeing their country and there's a pretty decent likelihood that that person is going to be killed, if they return to their country, that doesn't necessarily make an asylum case. So it's very difficult. And one thing that we're doing a lot of at Port Isabel was screening people for their potential asylum claims. And, there were a range of people that have very compelling stories, very, compelling claims. But unfortunately, we're also seeing a lot of people getting denied on their credible fear interviews, which is the initial process to even get into immigration removal proceedings and even be able to see a judge. Since most of those parents are in expedited removal proceedings, which means that they would never actually see a judge unless they pass this sort of threshold step.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely right. The Attorney General has certified some cases to himself that have made that basically have resulted in making it much harder to apply for asylum or to actually be granted relief under our asylum laws. And the consequence of that is that many of the families who came here may not actually be able to get asylum. And this is part and parcel of this administration trying to quickly detain and deport families. And so many of these families, in addition to the horrific trauma that they've endured of being separated, may actually be quickly, as you said, also maybe be subject to expedited removal because they won't be able to pass that initial hurdle to actually get before a judge. And so there's a lot of small steps that this administration has taken that have really flown under the radar, but that are actually going to make it increasingly difficult for asylum seekers who previously may have had legitimate asylum claims under the way this administration is carrying out policies will make it much, much harder for that relief to be accessed.
Great. We're almost out of time, but the good thing about having our own homemade studio and not having to take commercial breaks, we can go over a little bit. I just want to fit in one more question. How do we know, or how can we do a better job at holding the administration accountable?
So, I have said this multiple times, but I think voting is one of the best ways to hold this administration accountable. Of course, politicians, that's what they do. They respond to voters and their constituents and to the polls. And so showing up in November and making it clear that you will not forget what this administration has done to immigrants is so critical. We are thrilled that the ACLU is nearing 3 million supporters who are willing to take to the streets to call Congress and really demand answers from this administration, but also ask Congress to help hold this administration accountable. And we are seeing that happen increasingly, but it's important for citizens to both take to the streets and take to the voting booths to really hold this administration accountable.
Thank you. Well, once again, thank you to our amazing guests for being here today. Thank you for all of us all of you who tuned in. And I just want to end from a note from another one of our constituents. Mary from Bayside writes, so the more Republicans and conservatives can also be organized to oppose this monstrous vile policy, the better, not just Democrats. Save the children. Thank you all for tuning in.